No? Yes? Nah. Dock your pay for that. Good morning. Again. And again, and again. Good morning to you online. It's good to see you guys. One quick thing for you guys. We didn't do announcements this morning. This was a whole lot more important than announcements. The only real announcement other than Christmas is 1 week away, which means in 2 weeks you get to learn to write another number on your check. The only other thing I've got is on January the 7th, those of you who are board members, we have a board meeting to kick off the year. This is the one where we do all the finances and all the, whether or not we should continue it that way, what we should do, who we fire, who gets to preach for me, you know, all those kind of things. All that stuff's there. So, I am Les Farley, and my wife Grace and I are the founding and senior pastors. You know, I got the songs halfway right today. Now I can't talk. Somewhere along the way, I just got to mess up. So it's an honor to have you guys all with us. A couple of quick things. I say this all the time. You probably are tired of it, but the screen notes and scriptures are going to be on the screen behind me. That's why they're called screen notes and not Bob. For you guys, they are on the Bible app. And all you have to do is get the Bible app on your phone, go into that, look at the live events section, search for us by name or date. You can search by location if you're here. And it'll bring you up everything. Actually, you guys are going to get more than what I have on the screen here because there are some things that need to be done to make sure that you understand it without having to be here. Those of you here, if you don't want to get it on the Bible app, just take a picture of the screen. All I ask is just silence your phone because I like to answer them in the middle of my message. So, quickest way to do it, quickest way to get to the notes for you guys, go to our Facebook page, click the link that went active this morning at 9 o'clock. And it'll take you right there. All right, 1 week from Christmas Eve. Next Sunday is Christmas Eve. And you know how you know it's Christmas Eve in Northern Ohio? It's 60 degrees and raining. Never used to be that way when I was a kid. 12 months ago, I remember the first board meeting, and I'm sitting and looking at the entire calendar thinking, man, that is a long time away. It ain't been a long time away. It's here now. So, I'm doing my best to work our way through the series that I'm called The Greatest Story Never Told, and trying to give you, some of the truths that are in there. And the thing that gets me is that the more that I do this, the more that I study this and dig into it, the more true it is. It doesn't matter how deeply you look into the words and the translations. It's still true. It's still the Christmas story. It's still the greatest story ever. And we just need to make sure that we tell it like it needs to be told. The historical writings that I'm using come from several different Christian historians from the time of Jesus and shortly after. The first 2 weeks we talked about the cast, and we covered Joseph and Mary. Then we're going to talk about them a little bit more today. Go figure, they're part of the Christmas story. And then we talked about locations last week. 2 primary locations that were used during the entire Christmas story. And this week, we want to look at the opening Scene 1, no room at the inn. Now that part of it seems to be a very well-known part of it, right? I mean, I remember the first time I heard that was when Linus and Charlie Brown were talking about it in 1965 on a black and white 19-inch bubble screen TV. And they always used to tell us, don't sit too close because you'll ruin your eyes. Well, you would. That screen would poke your eye out because it's all bubbled out and stuff. Anyhow, we're going to start out the story, and you've heard this. We're going to go over it again. Luke chapter 2. Starting in verse 6, it says, while they, meaning Joseph and Mary, were there, Bethlehem, the days were completed for her to be delivered. I love that type of wording. What it meant was she's about to give birth. She's going to deliver a baby. Verse 7, she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths. Remember that? Look at that. That doesn't say clothes. Everybody says swaddling clothes. It's not. It's swaddling cloths. And laid him in a manger, and that's important here in just a few minutes. And laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. In the inn. So much in there. Heavenly Father, open our eyes to see your story, to see the Christmas story the way it played out. There's a whole lot of religious tradition, and we've covered this before, that implies that because Joseph was so poor that he had to go begging from door to door at the Motel 6 trying to get a room for his pregnant wife to have a baby in. But he wasn't just a poor carpenter. We covered that. If you listen to the first message, if those of you guys online want to look at it, you listen to the first message, what you find out is that Joseph was one of the carpenters. He was the guy that they came to when things needed to be done. And one of the words that was so interesting in the original Greek was that he was technologically savvy. Now, what technology did they have back then? But he was technologically savvy. He knew how to fit stones together. He knew how to work in wood. He knew how to read plans. He knew how to write plans. He knew how to direct people to get the job done. So he was not a poor carpenter. He was the carpenter that people went to when things needed to be done. So I already covered that, but I'll cover it again. He did not work for free. He was the expert in all forms. So if he wasn't poor, if he could afford to pay, why wasn't there any room at the inn? That's a great part of it. Because remember, last week we covered, it took them a while to get from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Why? Because somebody had to pee every 5 miles. And that happens, yes? Guys, you don't know. But if you're a dad, you know, you've had to deal with that kind of stuff. It happens. So, going to give birth any minute, had to stop multiple times. They got to Bethlehem late. And I don't just mean late at night. I mean everybody else pretty well got there. And the places were full. The population of Bethlehem, many of the theologians say that the population of Bethlehem was nearly 100 times what it typically was at that time of year. Now you stop and think about Mansfield and the number of hotels and motels that we have here. What would happen if 100 times the 124,000 people in this county showed up? 1 week. The entire Roman Empire was on the move. Bethlehem was no different from any other place. I want to do something to you. I want to talk about this Motel 6 attitude that the traditional stuff has. In Luke, well, in traditional stuff, and I've heard pastors talk about this, you know, the no vacancy sign was out at the inn. Well, historically, I want to tell you, there were no inns like we know of today. There were no hotels. There were no Motel 6s or Super 8s. Red Roof wasn't even invented yet. In Luke 2, verse 7, the word that's rendered as inn in most translations is a Greek word that means guest room. Most houses in those days, especially people that had larger houses, most houses had a large upper room. Does that term sound familiar? A large upper room where the whole family could gather and have one meal at one time, where friends could come over, travelers could come and stay inside without having to be let out in the cold. But for those of you that, anybody got a guest room in your house? How many people can you get in your guest room? We have a guest room. There's room for nobody because all my stuff's in there. That room that was translated as an inn, that room was where Jewish people allowed travelers. And if you know anything about the Jewish tradition, Jews were not allowed to turn away travelers if they possibly could avoid it because they were taught that they might be turning away an angel. So travelers always got to stay somewhere. And Joseph got there so late with his whole entourage that there wasn't anything available in the guest room. But being the honorable man that he was, I don't think Joseph just took that answer. I think he said, well, where can we go? What else is there? He's looking for the closest. She's ready to drop a kid any time now. What's the closest? What is the best? What's the most private? What's warm? What's dry? Where can we have this child? Somebody directed him to a cave that was down the hill underneath the house. And if you go to Jerusalem today, you can go to the Church of the Nativity and go down the steps and go right into the cave where Christian legend has it and see the manger carved into the rock wall. Oh yes, carved into rock. It was not wood. Wood was too precious. So the manger that Jesus was laid in was a little hole dug back into the wall at about the height that a lamb can get to so that it can feed there. So there's so much that we learn traditionally that really couldn't be back in those days. But here they go. They go down the hill, they go down the steps, and they go into this cave, and there's people there already. Don't think they're the only ones that got turned away. There's people with their animals, their children running and screaming like children do. Their fires, they're cooking. What are they cooking? That smells terrible. And they finally got to the back of the cave where it's a little private and it's a little quiet, and there's a manger carved into the rock. Let's stay here. The manger, one of the most visible signs that we use, and we have wooden ones that we've put on the stage before. That manger, we're going to need about 5 of you to carry that thing in because it's made out of a rock. And it's just huge. And that manger is still there. Now, wood wouldn't last that long. Rock does. And they carved it in that so that it would last a long time. Not just for Jesus, but he fulfilled something in that, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. I'm going to try my best not to rush to the end because there's some things in those 2 passages, those 2 verses that I need you to understand, and maybe it means nothing to you, but I already made the notes, so I have to say them. You want a few more tidbits? Look at Luke 2:7, the very first part of it. She, Mary, brought forth her firstborn son. Now, when it says firstborn son, now, and most of the translations have a capital S on son, but it shouldn't have been. It had no reference at all to his deity. It had more reference to do that he was the first of her children. So if it says firstborn, that means he wasn't the only. That makes sense, right? If you look at it biblically, Matthew 13:55 lists all of Jesus' half-brothers, the other children of Joseph and Mary. When he was born, he was it. But Joseph and Mary had more children. They had brothers. And in the next verse, it actually says that these guys are talking, and we know him. He's the carpenter's son. We know his brothers. And the next verse says, and his sisters. So he had at least 2 sisters. They're not listed. We don't know. But at least 2 because they used the plural of the word. And from a spiritual sense, if you look at how that was, from a spiritual sense, we're called, Paul wrote, we're called Jesus' brothers, male and female. So he's the firstborn, and we got born again. Now, let's get to the swaddling cloths, because I love this one. I've heard this most of my life. I heard this when I was first saved. They were so poor, they had to scrounge around on the floor of the stable and find dirty, nasty, stinky, messy pieces of cloth, and they wrapped that around a brand spanking new baby. Idiot. Tradition again. It's just tradition. Listen, you know what a swaddling cloth is? Now, most of you do. Moms know. Swaddling cloths are small strips of cloth, very soft, and it's made to wrap up a baby's extremities and their body. Swaddling just means that they're pulling it in tight so that the baby can't flail around and hurt itself. Now, even in today's world, when you're in the maternity ward, typically they teach you how to swaddle the baby because that baby just came out of 9 months of nice, close, I can hear mama's heartbeat at any given second. And I'm tight, I'm warm, I'm good, life is good. What is that light? And now all of a sudden they're out in this cold, noisy, dry world. And you swaddle them so that they get that sense of comfort again. My grandkids, my kids, but my grandkids especially, I watched several of the grandkids all the time when they were really, really young. And sometimes babies cry. I don't know if you've noticed that. Did your children ever cry? Sometimes they cry and you can't do anything. They just want to cry. Now, my first thought is, I'm going hunting. But you can't always do that. When you're the only one at home, the dog don't know how to do it. So what do? You take them. I would take them. I'd wrap them up in a blanket, and then I'd wrap them up in my arms as close as they could with their ear next to my chest, and I would just rock back and forth. And sometimes I'd hum, just something. But typically they quieted down after a bit because they got that feeling of safety again. Things weren't so loud, and they could hear my heartbeat. It wasn't Mom's heartbeat. I'm sure they could tell the difference. The swaddling gives them that sense of comfort. That's what this was done. And listen, these cloths were something that Mary and her family has had 9 months to prepare. Do you think they were surprised when she gave birth to a human? You know any Jewish moms? They're just like Italian moms. They want everything taken care of. They had 9 months to prepare these. 9 months of planning. 9 months of, you don't wear them all the time. You put them on the baby and something's going to get on them. Usually from the inside out. So you got to change them. You got to wash them. You got to clean them. You got to dry them. You got to get them ready for the baby again. Do you think Joseph didn't know that this was something that was needed done? Now remember, Mary's parents were very well-to-do. They had several homes. Historically, we're not taught in the Bible that, but Mary's parents had homes in Jerusalem. They had one in Nazareth. They had a couple of other places that they traveled to all the time. Those are the people that were helping Mary prepare all of this stuff for their grandchild. Grandmas, when you're ready to have a grandchild, do you just, we'll get to it later? First time you hear that child is pregnant, Grandma goes shopping. And she don't come back until all the prisoners are taken. Grandma still does that at our house. Actually, both of their grandmas do that, but it's like a contest. Anyhow, Joseph, the man specifically chosen to be the earthly father of the only Son of God. Do you suppose he didn't know that some of this stuff was needed? And do you suppose that when he packed the donkeys, multiple, because remember there's tents, there's food, there's everything that has to go along, extra clothes. Do you suppose he thought about the swaddling cloths? And if he didn't, do you suppose that Mary reminded him? And if Mary didn't remind him, do you suppose his mom did? And her mom did? And her dad said, just do it. Don't argue. We had 3 children. Grace and I had 3 children. Well, she had 3 children. I just stood by. But we had 3 children. And this woman, you want to talk about somebody that's tough. I used to think I was tough till I mangled my hand 3 years ago. But this woman had 3 children with no medication. Lamaze. Learn how to breathe and you won't have any pain. Liar. There was pain, but she concentrated on something else, and God forbid I'd go to class and I'd forget her focal point because she don't want to look at the lint in my belly button to focus on. 3 children, no medication. I'm just amazed. Now, it was loud. The hee-hee, ha-has, and hoo-hoos and all the other stuff that was going on was just, but you know what? Before we went, once it was verified she was pregnant, guess what Mom did? Not that mom, her mom, my mom. They went shopping. And we started getting blankets. Back in those days, we didn't know if it was going to be a girl or a boy, so we got lots of green and yellow blankets. We got diapers. We got everything that we needed. And then there was a whole list given to the dads in the Lamaze class of these are the things that go in the bag to come to the hospital. And then these are the things that go in the other bag that comes to the hospital after that bag's unpacked. And all of the stuff was listed out. You think Joseph didn't know that? We were so well prepared, woke up on I don't know, what was it, a Saturday? It was a weekend, I think, Friday or Saturday. I'm getting ready to go to work. I wake up at, I don't know, 5:30, 6 o'clock. I wake up and she's already awake. And I'm thinking, well, that's strange. She's pregnant. She shouldn't be awake right now. And I rolled over and said, hi, I got to get ready for work. And she said, that's fine. Do you want to be a dad today? And I said, yeah, it'd be great. And I got up and I was halfway to the shower. I went back and I looked and I said, today? I want to be a dad today? And she said, yeah, I think so. I got dressed. I got both of the bags. I took them out they were at the front door. I took them out. I put them in the van. I checked everything. Bags are good. Everything's great. I got in the van. I floored it. I headed out the gravel road to the main highway. I got to the stop sign. No grace. She was laughing so hard she almost gave birth on the front porch. She said, I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't have written that any funnier than that. Yeah, we got there in time. But anyhow, Joseph knew. Joseph, what would she have done if in the hospital she'd opened that first bag and all I had in there were rags that I'd been using to work on my truck with? It'd have been really loud then. Joseph knew. He wasn't that stupid. Jesus' birth wasn't an unplanned event. It took 9 months. They got some time. Now, it goes pretty quick as you get to the end of it. But the Greek word that was used to say swaddling cloths was also the very same word that was used for the strips of cloth that were wrapped around newborn lambs' legs and bodies to swaddle them in preparation of the priests looking at them and seeing if they were worthy to be Passover lambs. Had to be perfect. No spot, no blemish. Nothing, no wonky ears, nothing crazy. Perfect. And unlike tradition, those cloths were also clean and put into a shelf carved into the rock, folded, clean, ready for the shepherds to say, this lamb looks perfect. Let's swaddle it and get a hold of the priests. Now, I don't know if Mary used some of those also. If she did, it was particularly probably just to help keep the baby warm. But it's interesting to me. Jesus' first appearance on this earth symbolically foreshadowed the purpose of his coming. Born to be the Lamb of God to take away the sin of the world. And the Lamb of God is a term that was used for the Passover lamb. There was one used in Jerusalem during Passover. And that lamb got born that night in Bethlehem. And it just is you think about the details that God put together on all of this so that we can be where we are today, so we can be who we are today. God, and think about it, here's Jesus. Jesus lives in heaven. God the Father says, hey, son, I got a job for you. Sure, Dad, what you want me to do? Clean all the emeralds out from behind the throne? Nope, need you to go to earth and be a human. The Word became flesh in the person of Jesus our Christ. Fully God, fully human, all at the same time. But he came, and he knew he came to be a sacrifice for all of mankind, not just the people then. That, to me, honestly, is the true miracle of Christmas. The fact that someone who didn't even know us loved us 2,000 years ago enough to not only give up his place in heaven for almost 34 years, I guess, when you count the gestation period, but never shied away when it came time to sacrifice himself for you and me. A while ago we sang that Christmas song, Silent Night, and I've told you before, it was not a silent night. I do not believe that for one moment. From the time that Mary and Joseph entered Bethlehem, Joseph is knocking on doors, yelling through the door, talking with family to find out if they got room for them in their upper room. Somebody at some point said, well, maybe you should try a stable. Look down the hill. Shepherds use it. There's a few other people there. They get there and it's full of oxen. It's got lambs in it. It's got donkeys. And it's got people. And those people, and again, if you know anything about the Middle Eastern cultures, those people are not quiet. They can be quiet, but that's when they sleep. And finally, that area, like I said, way back in the back, he finds it. He finds some place where his family, where he can set all his stuff out, where Mary can be comfortable. And I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but having gone through childbirth with Grace with 3 children, I can tell you that during the contractions, she was not quiet. But I get it now. I understand it. And when I watched that miracle happen and that baby came out of a liquid environment and started breathing air, I wasn't quiet. It's amazing to watch that. And maybe Joseph was telling the servants, go find food for the animals. Go find some hay to put in the manger. We're going to have to lay the baby somewhere. Can't put him on the ground. Got to find some form of light. Get us a fire started. Find some water. Maybe bedding. And at some point in the wee hours, Mary cries, Joseph, he's here. And then you hear a newborn baby cry. And that's when you know he's here. Always held our breath on every one of the children. We're old enough, they still held the babies up and smacked them on the behind to make them cry the first time. But you always wait for that first cry. Because now you know, the baby's here. And it's a time not to be quiet. And think about what happened at that second in Mary's mind. Everything Gabriel had told her just came true. You think she was quiet? Gabriel said, you shall bring into the world a son, and you will call him Jesus. And can you hear the families arguing about, well, nobody's named that in our family? Well, maybe it wasn't exactly that, but it doesn't matter. The key element that God needed to reconcile us to him just got born in Bethlehem. The sacrifice was now in play. Can't be stopped anymore. Couldn't be stopped the moment that the Holy Spirit overshadowed Mary and the baby was conceived. And I wonder if anybody else in that cave other than Joseph and Mary had any kind of an idea. I think not, because there's a lot of people today that don't have an idea. John chapter 1. Verse 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Talking about Jesus. Verse 4 says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. That is an entire series in that one line. The things that says is just amazing. And verse 10, he was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world didn't know who he was. The world knew him not. For most of his life, from the beginning in the cave, through the crucifixion, and even till today, there are a lot of people that don't know him for who he is. They don't know what he gave up for them, what he gave up for each of us. But can you imagine the very people that he created didn't have a clue who he was, including the religious people? They denied who he was. God Almighty clothed himself in a human suit. And the one who had no beginning and no end began his life that night in Bethlehem. And like I said when I started out, the more truth you uncover in all of this story, the more truth you uncover by digging into the facts in the Bible, the more true they become. There's nothing wrong in the stories, and even if you change the words to be exactly what they're supposed to be, it says it even better than what it does now. And look how many people have been saved in the world, even knowing the traditional story side of it, even believing the traditional story side of it. So for me, I just want you to understand, You know, I'm not telling you to go out and get in arguments about whether Jesus was poor or not. But sometimes, the one thing I've learned the older I get, when somebody says something that's really outstanding, I just look at them and say, that's fascinating. How'd you come to that point? And let them talk some more, because pretty soon they'll talk themselves into salvation. So, next week, I'll complete for this year the Christmas series. Next week is Scene 2, The Season's Reason. We're going to get into a whole lot more details of what happened that night. We say night. Doesn't really matter what time of the day he was born. YouTube, thanks for joining us. For those of you here, I am going to turn you over. Isn't she pretty? Look at that shiny stuff. I don't have shiny shirts like that. She wants me to match her.